Welcome back. In Module 1, we explore the historical underpinnings of Africa-Middle East relations, from early trade routes and Islamic expansion to colonial disruption, decolonization, Pan-Africanism, and Pan-Arabism. Now, in Module 2, we move to the post-1970s era through the present day, a period marked by oil diplomacy and economic interdependence. The Arab-Israeli conflict's ripple effects in Africa. The role of international organizations such as the African Union and Arab League in the modern era. Development issues, globalization, and new challenges like migration, terrorism, and climate change. By the end of this module, you should be able to critically evaluate how these forces have shaped political, economic, and cultural cooperation and tension between Africa and the Middle East. 1. Oil and economic interdependence. 1.1 The oil factor. The discovery and exploitation of oil in the Middle East in the 20th century fundamentally altered global geopolitics. For Africa, Middle Eastern oil wealth presented opportunities for development aid and investment. Challenges when global oil prices fluctuated. Oil-rich Arab states such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE became major sources of financial assistance. Infrastructure investment in African countries. Employment opportunities for African migrant workers. 1.2 OPEC and African members. Several African states, Nigeria, Algeria, Libya, Angola, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea, are members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, alongside Middle Eastern states like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE. OPEC has created platforms for policy coordination, allowed African and Arab oil producers to collaborate on pricing strategies, strengthened political bonds through economic alignment. 1.3 Labor migration and remittances. Hundreds of thousands of Africans work in Middle Eastern countries, especially in the Gulf region. Migrants from Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and other states fill roles in construction, domestic service, and skilled professions. Remittances sent home contribute significantly to African economies. However, labor rights issues, including exploitation, poor working conditions, and restrictive visa systems, remain a persistent challenge. 2. The Arab-Israeli conflict and Afro-Middle East relations. 2.1 African diplomatic positions. The Arab-Israeli conflict has been a major shaping force in Afro-Middle East relations since the mid-20th century. After the 1973 Yom Kippur War, many African nations severed diplomatic ties with Israel in solidarity with Arab states. The Arab League actively encouraged African nations to adopt pro-Palestinian positions in the United Nations and other international forums. 2.2 Changing dynamics. From the 1990s onwards, some African nations began re-establishing relations with Israel, seeking agricultural technology, military cooperation, and investment. This created tensions with certain Arab League members but also demonstrated Africa's growing foreign policy independence. 2.3 Africa's mediation role. In recent years, African countries and the African Union have occasionally played mediation roles. Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia have facilitated dialogues between Palestinian and Israeli representatives. South Africa has been vocal in criticizing Israeli policies, framing them as issues of human rights and apartheid parallels. 3. Development issues in Afro-Middle East relations. 3.1 Aid and investment. Middle Eastern states, particularly oil-rich Gulf monarchies, have invested heavily in African infrastructure, agriculture, and education. Examples include Saudi Fund for Development financing roads and hospitals in Africa. Qatar Charity and UAE Red Crescent providing humanitarian aid. Egyptian universities hosting African students. 3.2 Trade partnerships. African exports to the Middle East include agricultural goods, coffee, tea, cocoa, minerals, gold, diamonds, oil and gas from African OPEC members. Middle Eastern exports to Africa include petroleum products, machinery and electronics, processed food and textiles. However, trade is imbalanced in many cases, with Africa exporting primarily raw materials and importing manufactured goods. 3.3 Challenges in economic cooperation. Political instability in both regions can disrupt projects. Over-reliance on resource-based trade makes economies vulnerable to global price shocks. Corruption and bureaucratic delays hinder investment. 4. Security and political challenges. 4.1 Terrorism and extremism. Both Africa and the Middle East face transnational security threats. Al-Shabaab in Somalia has links to extremist networks in the Middle East. ISIS affiliates have emerged in Libya, the Sahel, and parts of East Africa. Arms smuggling routes often connect the two regions. 4.2 Civil wars and regional conflicts. Conflicts in one region often spill over into the other. The Libyan civil war affected neighboring Chad, Niger, and Sudan. Instability in Yemen has influenced the Horn of Africa, particularly Somalia and Djibouti. 4.3 Peacekeeping and cooperation. African and Arab states have sometimes worked together in peacekeeping missions. Joint AU-Arab League observer missions in Sudan and Somalia. Collaborative anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. 5. Cultural and social interactions. 5.1 Religion. Islam remains a major cultural bridge. North Africa is predominantly Muslim and shares religious holidays, traditions, and jurisprudence with the Middle East. Islamic charities and scholarship create cross-regional networks. 5.2 Education and language. Arabic is an official language in many African states and one of the AU's working languages. Student exchange programs between African and Middle Eastern universities foster long-term personal and professional ties. 5.3 Sports and media. Popular culture, from football tournaments to Arabic language television, promotes shared identities. Pan-regional sports events and media collaborations enhance people-to-people connections. 6. The future of Afro-Middle East relations. 6.1 Emerging trends. Diversification of trade beyond oil and raw materials. Greater emphasis on renewable energy cooperation. Expanding digital infrastructure partnerships. 6.2 Challenges ahead. Balancing relations with global powers like the US, China, and the EU while maintaining Afro-Middle East cooperation. Addressing human rights issues in migration and labor. Managing the political consequences of climate change, which will affect water and food security in both regions. 6.3 Opportunities. Joint infrastructure projects such as rail links and port developments. Agricultural investment for food security. Collaborative scientific research, particularly in desert farming and water management. Lecture recap for Module 2. We examined oil as a driver of economic interdependence. The Arab-Israeli conflict's influence on Africa's diplomacy. Development cooperation and challenges. Shared security threats and collaborative responses. Cultural and social connections. Future opportunities and obstacles.